Night had fallen in a furious avalanche of snowflakes before the storm reached the little cabin that perched like a sentinel on the ridgeline. Fierce wind tore at the roof shingles, sending sheets of ice-cold sleet rattling against the wooden panes. Inside, a single oil lamp cast quivering circles of amber light on the rough-hewn floorboards. The hearth lay cold for lack of wood, and the wind's howl seeping through every crack made the walls groan like hollow bones. Mark Lawson lay rigid in his bed, broad shoulders rising and falling as he fought to stay asleep despite the storm's fury. His wife and daughter slept peacefully in the adjoining rooms, unaware of the restless gale that battered their refuge. A sudden, clattering scrape echoed through the hallway, sharp and unfamiliar. It was the sound of desperate scratching against wood, a sound no sane home should make at midnight. At the same instant, Duke, the family's loyal German shepherd, erupted from his crate in desperate agitation. His hackles stood on end. Low growls rumbled deep in his chest. He leapt to his feet and, guided by instinct, bounded toward the living room wall as though drawn by an invisible tether. Fur bristled, paws scrabbling against the rug. Duke fixed his gaze on the baseboard beneath, a heavy shelf. His growls rose to frantic barks, a grave alarm. Mark swung his legs over the bed and rose, boots thumping on the floor. In the wavering lamplight, he met Duke's wide, anxious eyes. Something was wrong, and Duke knew it. A second scrape, more urgent, rattled the paneling. The dog's body tensed, every muscle prepared to spring. Mark understood that Duke was not chasing a rat nor shadow boxing. He was fixated on something alive and trapped behind the wall itself. Duke pawed again, frantic and unyielding, blazing a trail of distress that could not be ignored. Mark reached down, his hand steadying Duke's muzzle, meeting the dog's pleading gaze. No human slept through that cry. No father stood unmoved by his dog's silent alarm. Mark flicked on a flashlight and followed Duke into the hallway, the howling gale leaking under the door like a drowning scream. He shone the light on the living room wall, catching drift shadows of swirling snow that appeared ghostly behind glass. Beyond that, in the core of the wall, he heard it again. The desperate scrape, the muted whimper. Duke barked once sharp, commanding, then halted, nose pressed to the wood. Mark knelt beside him, pressing his ear to the panel, a faint, frantic heartbeat of movement, mere inches within the hidden cavity. Mark shoved the heavy bookshelf aside, unleashing a swirl of dust motes that danced in the flashlight's beam like restless spirits. Behind the warped oak panel, a narrow crack yawned between stud and drywall, just wide enough for Duke's alert silhouette to fill. The air hung thick with old plaster and time-forgotten secrets, yet beneath the choking grit rose another sound, a tremulous mixture of terror and faint hope. Duke's ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring as he inhaled that hidden heartbeat. His low whine reverberated against the fallen books and discarded bric-a-brac. Mark's pulse hammered in time with the dog's warning as he retrieved a rusted pry bar from the dust-laden toolbox. Each careful twist of his wrist coaxed a splintered plank away, the wood groaning in protest until a jagged aperture yawned before them. Through that narrow breach, Mark's flashlight caught the glimmer of two wide, terrified eyes. He could just make out the contours of a tiny, golden-furred creature, its coat plastered with chalky white dust, and its ribs faintly visible beneath its trembling flank. The puppy's wings of fear, its hind legs arched stiffly against the cramped cavity, as though it had lain there imprisoned for time beyond counting. Mark let the beam settle on the puppy's quivering form. His heart clenched. Gently, as if handling broken glass, he extended a trembling hand into the hollow. The puppy recoiled at first, emitting a soft, broken whimper. But Mark's voice, steady despite his racing chest, spoke calm assurances as he cradled the tiny body to his chest, pressing it close under his flannel shirt for warmth. The stubborn bundle of fur shivered, then relaxed just enough to let out a fragile sigh. Beside him, Duke exhaled in a dog's version of relief, his rough tongue sweeping across the puppy's dust-caked muzzle. Mark rose to his full height. The rescued pup nestled against his heart, while Duke planted himself loyally at his side, vigilant as ever. Outside, the wind rattled window panes with the promise of a coming storm, and within the makeshift sanctuary of that old study, two lives began weaving together. one newly saved, the other forever transformed by the smallest heartbeat, echoing against the cold wood and plaster. Mark moved with deliberate silence, cradling the trembling puppy against his chest as Duke bounded ahead through the knee-deep drifts. Frost clung to Mark's beard, and the storm's roar filled the night, but he scarcely noticed. Sophie appeared. In the hallway, her robe slipping from one shoulder, eyes half-lidded with sleep. When she saw the small, dust-caked creature in her father's arms and the anxious dog at his heels, something fierce and protective ignited in her chest. She yanked on her boots, cold leather snapping around her ankles, and crept forward until her tiny hand found her father's. He squeezed it gently, and together, man, girl, dog, and rescued life, they climbed into the cab beneath the onslaught of wind and snow. The clinic at Winterbrook sat dark and shuttered, its windows blank beneath thick sheets of ice. Mark's knuckles went white as he clicked through the scanner channels until a crackling voice emerged. "Tom, it's Mark," he hissed into the static. Moments later, distant headlights cut through the swirling flakes like twin beacons of mercy. When Tom Hayes skidded to a halt on the rutted drive, Mark leapt from the truck with the puppy wrapped in Sophie's outgrown blanket. Duke danced around them, every hair on his back prickling with urgency. Inside the brief sanctuary of the cabin's entryway, Tom shrugged off layers of snow and lantern light danced across his weathered face. He knelt beside the battered bookshelf, positioning his crowbar with practiced ease. Plaster crumbled in silver showers, and when the final wooden sliver fell away, the puppy's golden fur glowed like a candle against the grey dust. Tom and Mark worked in tandem lever brace, gentle coaxing until at last the tiny body slipped free. Sophie's breath caught as they wrapped the pup in fresh blankets. Its feeble whine was nearly drowned by the crackle of the hearth. But as Sophie pressed the bundle to her cheek, the puppy nuzzled her palm with hopeful warmth, and in that circle of lamplight and laughter, a fractured night found its first fragile peace. The wind's howl outside softened to a distant murmur, as if the storm itself had paused to catch its breath. Inside the little cabin, the door closed with a gentle thud, and Tom's headlights dwindled to a single fading glow against the snow. In the hush that followed, Mark, Sophie, and Duke gathered before the hearth's crackling blaze, forming a small circle of warmth and watchful care. Mark settled into the armchair, the rescued puppy cradled against his chest like a precious bundle of hope. Its tiny ribcage rose and fell in rapid, frightened pulses, each delicate beat a reminder of how close it had come to perishing. Sophie climbed into her father's lap, wrapping her arms around him as though she could share his strength. Her wide, tear-blurred eyes fixed on the pup's cloud-blue eyes, searching for a spark of recognition beneath the dust. Every few seconds, she reached out a tentative finger to stroke the puppy's damp fur, whispering soft assurances that it was safe now, safe with them. Duke lay curled at their feet, head resting on his outstretched paws, eyes never straying from the hearth. The dog's steady breathing and rhythmic tail thump against the wooden floor formed a quiet lullaby, a promise that danger had passed and sanctuary now reigned. Grateful for this silence, Mark eased the puppy's head onto a folded blanket on his knee and glanced around for any clue to its origins. The neck was bare, no collar, no tag, yet the pup's fur was clean at its roots and its coat fine, the clear sign of a once pampered companion. Mark rose and moved to the kettle, steam curling from its spout like a question lingering in the air. He poured a shallow pool of tepid water into a chipped saucer. The puppy lifted its head, nose trembling, and drank in small, eager sips, as if tasting life for the first time. Mark's jaw set with determination. "We'll get you better," he murmured, tilting the saucer so the pup could drink more easily. Sophie leaned forward, helping to steady the dish with gentle fingertips. Duke, sensing the fragile bond forming, rose and gently nudged the puppy's head, guiding it toward warmth. Mark draped an extra wool blanket over the trio, sealing them in a cocoon of safety. Outside, another gust rattled the windows. But here, within these four walls, a new vigil had begun. Father, daughter, service dog, and rescued pup, bound together by a thread of fate stronger than any storm. And as the firelight danced across their faces, Mark knew that tomorrow would bring questions of vet visits and foster homes. But tonight, they simply watched over a small life reborn. Morning light filtered through the clinic's frosted windows. As Mark and Sophie pressed their palms against the cold glass, eyes fixed on Duke's silent vigil beside Ryder's recovery room. The storm had quieted into a steady drizzle, leaving rivulets of water tracing down the panes, but inside, hope was the clearest current of all. When Dr. Patel finally opened the door, her lab coat shimmering with moisture, Mark felt his heart leap. "He's stable," she announced, voice soft but certain. "His temperature's normal, and he's taken his fluids well. No more frostbite. Threats and those fleas are long gone." She paused, letting the words sink in. "He can come home tomorrow morning if you're ready." Tears brimmed in Sophie's eyes. Mark lifted her into his arms, and together they slipped through the door to Duke's side. The old dog's tail thumped in cautious joy as they entered. The room, and there, on the lowest bunk of the warmed kennels, lay Ryder, his fine golden coat already fluffing back to life. When Ryder saw Sophie, his cloud-blue eyes brightened into a tentative spark. Sophie knelt, and Ryder licked her cheek in greeting, his little tail wagging so hard his whole hind end bobbed. That evening, they drove home under skies that had cleared to pale blue. Ryder lay bundled in Sophie's lap, drinking in the warmth. Of the cab, Duke rode shotgun head perched on the console, watching every mile. At the cabin, Mark created a nest of blankets by the hearth, and Ryder curled into its center as Sophie and Duke gathered close. By bedtime, Ryder was already exploring the edges of his new world, sniffing at bookshelves, gently pouring a brazen pine cone. Sophie tucked him into their shared blanket and whispered, "Welcome home, little brother." Duke settled at the foot of the hearth, offering silent approval. Outside, the pines sighed in the gentle wind, as if sighing in relief alongside them. Inside, father, daughter, and two dogs, one seasoned and steady, the other small and brave, found their way into the soft rhythm of a family renewed. A week later, the living room wall gleamed with fresh pine paneling, every seam sealed so neatly that nobody would guess of the tiny sanctuary hidden behind it. In front of the hearth's gentle glow, Mark sank into his favorite armchair, while Sophie sprawled on the thick wool rug, and Duke stretched out at their feet. Ryder, no longer trembling or frail, tossed a bright neon squeaky toy across the floor, pouncing after it with youthful abandon. Sophie's laughter rang like silver bells as Duke joined the pursuit, bounding in lazy circles around the pup, until both tumbled into a happy heap of wagging tails and playful yips. That evening, the family gathered around the rustic pine table for their first dinner, with Natalie home from her overseas assignment. Candles flickered in glass jars down the center of the table, casting soft shadows on Ryder's amber-bright eyes as he nosed around Natalie's boots, slurping from a little porcelain bowl at her feet. Natalie reached down to scratch behind, his ears murmuring, "You're part of the family now." And Ryder responded with a contented waffle, his tail sweeping crumbs of rye bread into neat little piles. Mark lifted his hand and pressed his palm to the smooth paneling above the hearth, remembering the frantic scrape of wood and the hollow cry that had first drawn him into that secret space. He closed his eyes, feeling the grain under his fingertips, and smiled. What had once been a hidden trap of desperation was now the cradle of new life. Ryder's frightened beginnings, tucked safely behind a wall that welcomed hope instead of hiding fear. As the room filled with the mingled warmth of shared stories, clinking cutlery and gentle puppy snores, Mark realized that every scratch on his wheelchair and every gray whisker on Scout's memory were threads in a tapestry that now included this tiny golden bundle. Outside, the wind rustled through the pines, but inside, the cabin pulsed with laughter, love, and the promise of all the mornings yet to come. Snow thawed in March, and Ryder blossomed into a strong retriever pup. Duke, now older, taught him gentle ways. Sophie taught him to fetch and roll over, giggling each time Ryder succeeded or tumbled. One afternoon, Natalie found a tag, a small brass collar engraved Ryder, and the faint etching of an address. Mark dialed the number. A woman answered, trembling. Her young nephew's beloved puppy had vanished in a storm. Tearful thanks followed, but the woman insisted they keep Ryder bonded as they were. She could not bear to tear them apart. 6 months later, the cabin glowed with warm light as a new family portrait hung above the hearth. Mark, Natalie, Sophie, Duke, and a gleaming adolescent rider, collar snug. The storm's wrath had passed, replaced by gentle rains and green buds. Inside, laughter rose in place of howls. In the darkest of storms, a silent signal, a dog's desperate cry, a father's courage. A daughter's heart can lead us to life where we least expect it. Our loyal friends teach us that every scratch behind a wall may hide a call for help, and in answering it, we discover the true meaning of family. If this tale of rescue and loyalty warmed your heart, please subscribe for more inspiring stories from AnimalVerse, where every heartbeat matters.